Hi everyone, my name is Melissa van Dijk, and in today's video I want to clear up the confusion about hyaluronic acid once and for all. Now, one thing I keep seeing again and again is people applying it to soaking wet faces or spraying water in between steps, and then they're wondering why their skin feels tight, sticky or even dry afterwards. And I think that's because the advice online has become so mixed up and demonstrations just don't show what's really going on. Now, if you haven't been living under a rock, then you've probably heard that hyaluronic acid should be applied to damp skin. And that's actually where the entire confusion started, because a lot of people treat damp and wet skin as they mean the same thing, but they don't. So let me explain this to you a bit better. Now, wet skin means there's still visible water sitting on your face, maybe a few drops or even some areas that are still dripping. You can clearly see a layer of water on the surface. And that's just too much, because if you apply your serum at that point, you're basically watering it down. And as a result, the formula becomes much weaker. It slides around instead of spreading evenly, and it can't really form a proper layer on the skin like it's supposed to. Now, skincare chemists design these formulas to work at their intended concentration on the skin, not mixed with extra water. So when you apply them to wet skin, you're essentially diluting them and changing how they perform. And that can make the product feel patchy or sticky, and later on, or even right away after a few minutes, it can start to peel or give you that tight sensation as it dries, which you might then mistake for it pulling water out of your skin. But it's not, and more about that a bit later. But before we get to that, I want to cover dry skin as well, because you can actually apply your hyaluronic acid serum to dry skin. That's completely fine. And by that I mean when you've waited a few minutes after cleansing and all the leftover surface moisture has evaporated. So your skin just feels normal again, not damp or wet, simply like it usually does. That's what completely dry means in this case. And at that point, your skin doesn't need to be re-wetted, because the hydration actually comes from the product itself, not from the extra water on your face. So essentially, hyaluronic acid doesn't need you to add water for it to work properly, because it's already in a water-based formula. Its molecules are fully hydrated inside the serum, so when you apply it, you're spreading a thin layer of that hydrated gel over your skin. It forms a light, flexible film that helps hold in moisture on the surface as well as reduces water loss. So adding extra water beforehand doesn't make it work better. It just dilutes the product and can make it sit unevenly on the skin. Okay, so now that I covered that, I want to talk about what hyaluronic acid actually does, because that's another area where I see that a lot of misinformation spreads. It's not some sponge that absorbs water from deep inside your skin, as it's often wrongly claimed to be. Hyaluronic acid is a stable sugar molecule that already holds onto water within the serum. And when you apply it, you're spreading that hydrated layer onto your face, where it forms a thin, flexible film that helps keep your surface smooth and comfortable. And that's really all it does, which is exactly what makes it so effective. So when people say that hyaluronic acid pulls water out of your skin, well, that's not really true. Because what actually happens is that after you apply it, the serum forms a thin film that holds onto the water it already contains. And over time, some of that surface water slowly evaporates into the air, especially if the surrounding air is dry or if you haven't applied a moisturizer on top. Now, in normal indoor humidity, somewhere around 40 to 60%, this process takes several hours. But if the air is very dry, below about 30% humidity, for example in constant air-conditioned rooms or during winter, it can happen much faster. And as this moisture leaves, the film becomes less hydrated and starts to tighten slightly on the skin surface. And that tightening is what gives you that dry or pulling sensation after a while. So it's not dehydration coming from inside your skin. It's simply the outer film losing some of its own moisture to the environment. And that's why it usually works best to follow your hyaluronic acid serum with a moisturizer that contains ingredients able to form a thin layer on the skin. So these are called emollients and occlusives. You'll see them on the ingredients list as things like dimethicone, squalane, shea butter, cocoa butter, various plant oils, petrolatum, mineral oil, or even beeswax. They sit on top of the skin and help to slow down how quickly water evaporates, keeping that hydrated feeling for longer. So if your moisturizer doesn't contain any of these types of ingredients, then the water in the hyaluronic acid film can still escape quite easily, especially in dry air. Okay, so now that I have also covered that, I want to move on to a proper demonstration so you can see how to apply it. So start by cleansing your face either above the sink or in the shower. Then after cleansing, gently pat your skin with a towel. This makes your skin damp and you won't see it, but there's still a little moisture left in the skin. Then take a few drops of your hyaluronic acid serum, for example the Ordinary's 2% plus B5, and blend it evenly over your face. You don't need much, just enough to create a thin layer all over, or just enough to cover the areas where you want to apply it. Then you can leave it as it is, or wait for about 30 seconds to a minute before applying your moisturizer on top. Et voila! No extra water and sprays needed, just how it should be. And there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is the whole apply to damp skin advice originally came from a good place. People and companies just wanted to remind you not to use hyaluronic acid on completely dry skin in a very dry environment, because they weren't sure if it might make the skin feel even tighter or drier afterwards. And then they probably thought that adding even more water would help fix that, because they assumed hyaluronic acid might otherwise pull moisture out of the skin. So it started as a well-meant tip to keep your skin comfortable, but over time the message got blurred because a few influencers and dermatologists with a large reach demonstrated it wrongly, maybe even without thinking about it too much, or simply because it looked nice on camera and then it spread. Anyway, in the end it's really simple. Hyaluronic acid is already in water, so it doesn't need you to add more. You can use it on damp skin or even on dry skin, just not on wet skin. And when I say damp, I mean there's no visible water sitting on the face. It's just that fresh moment right after you patted it dry. That tight feeling you sometimes notice isn't your skin drying out, it's just the product's surface film losing a bit of water to the air. And if you want to keep that soft, hydrated feeling for longer, finishing with the right kind of moisturizer is key. And that's all there is to it. Simple, effective, and hopefully a lot clearer now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Happy skin caring!